Okay.
So, oh, so you want me to go again?
Yeah, no, say it again. I had forgotten to start recording, so say it now since
good.
I just turned on the record button.
Sure. Yeah, this is year 23, season 46, episode 9, KGB Monday Night Poetry, and we're just going to keep this rolling, and hopefully be back in the bar, within the next, we'll say 1 to 3 years. What do you sound good?
Someday we'll be back in the bar. All right, so tonight we're here with Patrick Donnelly and Charlie Clark, and I'm just going to jump right in and introduce Charlie Clark. So this introduction has been 24 years in the making, because I have known Charlie Clark since we were undergraduate creative writing majors at the University of Maryland. Sure, I could tell you story after story about buying bowling trophies at thrift stores, about a group Halloween costume that never happened involving mangled Princess Diana, about a trip to Graceland in Charlie's Volkswagen bus that should really only have been used for solving mysteries, even though we weren't the kind of young people who solve mysteries, about setting off fireworks in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly, about being head waiters at Breadloaf a few years apart, about what got said at his wedding. But instead of those stories about Charlie Clark, I will say that the newest employee at the Museum of Ruin is a long-awaited debut collection that is well worth the wait. In these poems, Clark's voice is so calm that what is distressing or wondrous arrives before the reader has had time to realize what is happening. Clark's nonchalant speakers are born to a world that they'll never quite fit into, but to which they have been ineluctably shaped. Outsiders aware of being insiders. In these poems, the reader finds not quite the sense of having been born to the wrong people or to the wrong place, but having been born to a world that the speaker can never get used to or take for granted, to always see the strangeness where everyone else sees the familiar, to be loved or love from across a divide that will never quite close up. Like John Berryman or Joel Brower, this frisson of difference creates an awareness of both cruelty and magic that cannot dissipate. And in presenting this vision to the reader, we see the world newly, as ruined, as melancholy, as beautiful, as failed, as ours. Charlie Clark's poetry has appeared in New England Review, Plowshares, Threepenny Review, and other journals. He studied poetry at the University of Maryland. He has received scholarships from the Breadloaf Writers Conference and was a 2019 NEA Fellow in Poetry. He lives in Austin, Texas with his wife, Sasha West, and their baby, who's not really a baby anymore, Sadie. And his first book of poems is Newest Employee at the Museum of Ruin. With all of our technical difficulties, please welcome Charlie Clark.
Hey, thank you, everybody. Jason, thank you so much for that introduction. It was 24 years in the making, and I have 24 years of gratitude listening to it. That was really wonderful. So I'm just going to jump in and start reading. The book, it's not a project book. It doesn't have, a real single overriding theme. I think, there are definitely certain things that kind of come back in it. And I think one thing that I wound up doing wound up noticing is that a lot of the work sort of is responding to the work of other artists and writers. And I think it's something that took me a while to get to the point where I wasn't trying to hide that, and I was just sort of laying it bare within the poems. So that happens a lot. I think if you weren't feeling charitable, you might say I name drop a lot, but I'm feeling charitable to myself. So I'm going to not say that's what I'm doing. The first poem I'm going to read is the first poem in the book. It's called Pseudo-Martyr, which is the name of a prose treatise that John Donne wrote in 1610 about how Catholics in England should swear oaths of loyalty to the crown. And the poem has nothing to do with any of that. It's just that I was happening to read some John Donne at the time that I was writing this. So here's Pseudo-Martyr, and I like the title. So, every 5 years, my failure as a man gets weirder. Once, in the woods and lost, I tried to track a trail of vapor home. That was the 7th time I legitimately thought that I might die. Another time in Paris was over a bar tab in a discotheque called Le Pelican. After that, I went home and read John Donne poorly. He wrote from convolution into convolution. He tried to say which is preferable, to be good or destroyed. he preferred to be destroyed. He did not write of pelicans, yet I read him poorly. So in reading him, I thought of pelicans. How they hunt by an immense falling from the air. How long they carry the dead around inside their mouths. How they have no notion of their strangeness. How they would be enviable if not for this. They are fervent but without song. That night I dreamed of a pelican named John Donne. This is typical of my weirdness. It fell upon our marriage bed. I volunteered to be the one consumed. I sat up inside the creature's beak, beside the many dead it hauled. I tried to speak, but its gullet swallowed every sound. The dead there had devised a kind of pantomime. I learned it soon enough. Its every word meant grieve. Grieving, alive but dead, I thought of my sweet wife. With her in mind, I found the deadest, dreadful body there. I tore a length of its dried flesh free. Upon that flesh I wrote these words. With some finger bones, I bored a hole through the pelican's low beak. When we passed above our home again, I spat the message through. It darted, ardent as an insect, into my wife's sleeping ear. She woke then, not knowing what I'd done. My song thrived inside her, humming always, though I was gone. And I never know what to say in between poems, so I'm just going to kind of like plow through some poems, and if it occurs to me to say anything amusing, I'll stop and say it, but otherwise I'm just going to keep going. This poem is called Giving Stuff Up. One friend decided to forego sugar for a month. Another, the word wept. A third, quit therapy in favor of praising the aubergine tinge of the clouds that served as backdrop to the tree limbs falling through his mother's yard. Sometimes I want to give up living by lists and information, yet I still want to tell you how this morning I watched a man launch some kites on a beach. When the wind had a good hold of one, he'd take a lighter to its string. He must have doused them in gas beforehand, because the flames ran fast, caught the kites, and the ensuing red shreds frothed upon the vapors. Listen, if you've never heard about the time Shakespeare got drunk, snuffed the candelabra, and in its dark tried to wrestle every member of his cast, that's because damage had paired with sorrow even then. That fiasco was nothing. Where he lived, the wind could change direction, and for 2 whole weeks, the house would smell like gas. That's half of how he came up with the mist for Macbeth's witches. The other half was theft. After the headaches passed, everything in those fumes seemed like a dream. Even weasels lolled in the grass, like pets built out of licorice. I don't know how he invented the words gust or radiance in such haze, but I'm glad for their perfection. The modern match was perfected in 1805. Before that, every burn meant tinder, flint, steel. So that man igniting kites still could have done it by the Thames in 1597, although I like to imagine whatever material he'd have used to build them proved clumsy in the river's wind, every flaming body rising no more than a few yards before it plunged. Or maybe the fault lay with the wind. Listen, seeing them through the window, Shakespeare claimed the first one as his son. The rest became the angels he renounced, hearing thereafter only human tongues. And keeping in line with my name dropping of a sort, this poem is called Rimbaud's Father, and I don't actually know much of anything about Arthur Rimbaud's father, except that he was an infantryman in the French army during the conquest of Algeria. So pretty much, aside from that, everything that happens in this is speculation on my part. So Rimbaud's father. Once in Algeria, wild dogs ate the wooden forewheel of a woman's pushcart while he and his fellow infantrymen looked on. a half-dozen of them having commandeered her porch for napping. Some things are inevitable. How he tried to help her clean the pulp up after, how something in the slobber, the thickness of it coating the wood, slowed him. Each scrap white as chicken meat after the cleaver and the peeling and the rinsing in cold water. He knew men who bragged about eating their lieutenant's thighs after weeks trapped in cold mountains. He knew it was mostly lies and that it would be their only legacy. He knew to call the dogs charms sent to assure him he would survive this and that he was not destined for greater things. So when one dog came back, mottled, prancing, sharp cowlick of its jaw angled high to keep the rough strip of wheel it mouthed from dragging, one of the soldiers shot it. It bled out, howling, and they let it. Soon after, another soldier torched the woman's house. He cut for himself a swatch of her curtain. No secret to see in the elegant little turnstiles of its embroidery. History can be dainty. Even panic can seem quaint there. He knows what the future has no use for. He's no different than the acres of his father's failing orchards, his hours itching the harvesting, the bland to bitter paste they made of all its ripeness figs. So, in addition to name dropping writers, I also have a bad tendency to want to include music in my poems, and sometimes that works well. This poem is about the great or awful mid-90s metal band Pantera, which is amusing to, I guess, me. But it's called Ranch Hand Blasting Pantera into Cow Pasture. To their bones, it must seem like strange wind. He's listened with them for 3 years now. The only effect it's had is that when the song's cut off, he hears a ringing rather than their murmur. It's that much less rebuke. He thought it would move through the herd more like when he drives among them a few bars faster than he should, headlights like wet blotter shining on their hides. Only in the low and whirl of such privacy does he watch his hands become two thick pistols giving back to heaven its little bolts of thanks. Walking through the pasture, the fact that he knows people who claim to see loved ones' eyes stare back continues to confuse him. He stares and sees the colors of the uniforms it was in a past he did not disclose on his application, too often his duty to make clean. He stares and sees the shale of rain clouds or smoke rising from some far grass patch whose location is vague but no less difficult for him to believe in beyond the rudiments of its burning. He stares and sees the illiterate that for 3 years now he has dreamed of, sees the color of his tongue as he receives his death papers, papers he understands immediately even though he cannot read, because they are a king's words, meaning they have been delivered, sealed in a gaudy wine-dark wax, meaning they are already everywhere, meaning you can burn them. You can burn the paper or the vellum or whatever they arrived on. You can burn that iota of the kingdom, and still its words will go on ringing. Each night for 3 years now, he has dreamed of the illiterate doomed by the king's pleasure. Each morning for 3 years now, he has woken to flanks of stale cornbread, these farting cows, and this music that he loves. This love he caused, slapping the closest one, seeing how well this, the latest, most benign form of hardness he has tried on works. After 3 years of appraising it, he knows it never will. 3 years. Bleak to bleak to bleak, to bone to bone. He believes his kingdom will never deliver him from these cows. Their days together comprise layers of gray, wet grass and his high mockeries. As loudly as he can make it go, syllable after syllable, the word respect tattoos the air as though the air were an eager wall of flesh. Call it pleasure, in the flesh of the ear, this breath that lingers even as it vanishes. Just trying to figure out what I do and don't have time to do here. Okay, I think I'm going to read two more poems. And this one is it's called "Carrying My Brother to the Ambulance." This close, I for the fourth decade notice how beautiful I find the stark black lashes of his eyes. It's autumn, after autumn, actually, everything awash in the given plenty of spent leaves. Ice in the air despite the sun. A few bars of something bracing I can't quite place grace the whole of the cradle that we've made. As slow as if to ask what song is that? I can't stop noticing, which is already a kind of asking, which is one way to have a story go on without end. Another way to keep a story from ending is never to start telling it. My brother's silent, split, spilt, bruised, half buried in his milk, gone red at the tongue, orange at the eye, so entwined, and still I don't stagger once in the dirt. I still have my brother, my hands noticed by the weight, as if the worth of life were known. I never knew I could carry him. Now it's another story. Once I caught his front teeth with a bat. Once I saw a dog chasing a child and I tackled it. I didn't think of fear until its body was here livid in my arms, and by then there was no time. Now, out of my hands great air like they are the place in the earth where roots continue to turn dirt into themselves, while above a blade has clipped the bloom completely. All right, and I'm gonna read just one more poem, which before I do, I just want to thank KGB Bar and Jason again for inviting me. This has been something, I guess I should say that Jason's first book came out in 2004, I want to say, through Four-Way Books, and he was the first person that I knew who had published a book, and he was the person, when I held it in my hand, and I was like, oh, people I know can actually do this. So Jason, I dedicate the whole reading to you because I think you were the first person who made me realize that this was actually something that we could do seriously and not just for fun before we waited to grow up. So, and not for that reason, for other reasons entirely. This poem is called Mr. Dreaming. Although, Jason, you're dreaming. Now, when I see a night that's weak with clouds, it makes me nervous. All those rings wrenched around the moon. There are rhymes I don't remember that say whatever it is, such as skies rising supposedly portends. Whatever it is, I feel it. Sometimes I wish the night were unnecessary. And most nights that I feel that way, I feel the same about day come daybreak. See the sun bleeding through the trees? Not being a sailor doesn't make you any safer from it. I used to think being left-handed meant I was more likely to die in a car wreck. It turns out the biggest risk is living. There's a grimness to that thought, something shallow and permanent. When I want to be better than that, I give myself one of Whitman's catalogs to chew on. It doesn't last, that first capacious bubble of patience. However well he may have wandered and adored it, Whitman knew the world is a livid veil of dust, and that it's insane with blood. And he never even wept in West Virginia. When snow surprised everyone in late April, New Jersey, 1890, did Whitman's neighbors roll their eyes at all of his raw praise? Even if they weren't farmers, they likely knew what damage spring snows can do. Did he? One book I'm reading makes the claim that, quote, Whitman disliked farming with some passion. In my 1 year as a farmhand, I laid fire pots between orchard lines whenever it would snow. Everything about those hours, the limbs' frigid fractal beauty, briefly outgrowing my discomfort with the open, I detested and desired. Even sipping schnapps between the rows, how the darkness gave everything the gauzy aquatic depth of the impersonal and alluring. Going through, setting down the tiny burning bowls, I was as slow about that as I was everything. My boss called me Mr. Dreamy and meant it as an insult. I haven't gotten over it so much as tried to sculpt my life such that my being dreamy isn't going to cost anyone's bottom line. One harvest day that year, I forgot which way the road knife and flipped the truck and walked away. When the ambulance arrived, I smiled and tried to wave it by. When my boss arrived, he threw a wrench at me. It was dark by then. I'd been sitting there for hours. The sky was clear. The moon blew through it. The road below was lit bright with our tremendous apples. My whole life I have wondered what's become of me. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. All right, so I've put the link to last week's reading in the chat, and so what we're doing now is we're premiering each week's reading the next Tuesday. So if you enjoyed this reading, then tomorrow you can go see last Monday's reading, and then this reading will premiere next Tuesday on YouTube. And I put the link for Charlie's book in the chat as well. So if you want to order a copy of that from Bookshop and support local bookstores. We have to, oh wait, just a minute, sorry. I have to get the screen share correct. Here we go. So KGB, to stay afloat, is doing a Fundly. So it's fundly.com. Are you guys seeing that? Mm-hmm. And so you can see that there's a lot left to raise. There's 8,000 of 100,000, so hop on that. If you choose the $15 level, you have 2 drinks and a $4 tip. They go all the way up. MFAs are much cheaper. They don't actually, MFAs never give you $25.
Yeah, I know. The MFA should be the one that's 50,000.
I know.
And we point this out every time, but only because we have a slightly different audience every time. But if you, if anybody has any ideas for what they would do with, if you donate 50 grand, you get a $45,000 bar tab. Could you fill it? And how long would it take? I guess you'd be sipping on, I don't know.
I think you'd have to be a character in Achiever story.
Yeah.
To get through a full $45,000.
Because it's not like they don't have $500 bottles of wine there either. I mean, we're talking like, your basic Cabernets.
Although, did you see it was I think it was Balthazar. They mixed up. They were decanting wine into the wine carafes, and then they served a $2,000 bottle of wine to the wrong table. They mixed it up with an $18 bottle of wine.
Did anybody notice the difference? They must have. They had to have.
The owner actually went over and was like, I can't charge you $2,000 for this. It was Tech Bros. I mean, he could have just charged them. Yeah. Because they were like, oh, this is, oh, yes. Whereas, and then he had to go over and be like, actually, it's an $18 bottle.
I mean, they did ruin the world, right?
Right. They broke it. The least they can do is pay too much for wine.
I would love to know the people who can tell the difference. Like, I want to know if anyone knows the difference.
I think 2,000 to 18 is sort of an interesting range. Like, there's definitely differences, but That's a quite.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to sommelier school, you're supposed to be able to tell the
easily.
difference.
Yeah.
And then this is if you don't feel like spending the $50,000 contribution to KGB, there's also a Venmo, and the proceeds in part go to Seiji, our beloved bartender who is without us.
Yeah, that one's more like a tip, $1 or $2 with what you might spend at the bar, which you can also do on the Fundly page, I think, as well. They certainly wouldn't refuse it. But I wanted to quickly mention also with Charlie's reference to Pantera, if anybody was wondering why I wrote Dimebag Lives in the chat, Dimebag is the name of he was the metal guitarist who played with Pantera and who actually sort of had a horrible, he was killed on stage while playing by some crazy person. Yeah.
Wasn't he shot in the head? Some
guy jumped up on stage and shot him. Yeah. And it wasn't a Pantera concert. It was after the band had broken up. But yeah, they were important. I was never a huge Pantera fan, but I liked them. And I know my brother was like totally obsessed.
I know that they were beefing with the old lead singer.
Yeah. Philip. Yeah.
Even they were beefing with him. They were like, even in his death, they were like, if he had something to do with it. It was behind the music conflicts.
People love music. I
guess. My understanding is that the guy who did it, I mean, had obviously mental health issues, but had been claiming that he had written most of their songs.
Oh my God! Okay.
Had stolen the ideas from even the guy lived in Cleveland or something. I don't know where it happened, but yeah.
Wow. I wrote all of Pantera's songs.
Mm-hmm.
I've been keeping that to myself, but I actually wrote all of those.
I don't usually tell people this, but I wrote all of Whitesnake's songs.
Speaking of that, I just watched Botched with Tawny Katane.
No. How was it?
Yes. It was interesting because she looks amazing, but her boobs over the years, she had gotten them done and redone. And she's like, I'm in my 50s now and it's just different. It's just they looked pretty saggy and inward, and she's like, I want to kind of vamp them up again. I'm like, she looks great. I'm so happy for her. I don't know. I'm like, she just looks great. And then the doctor, I think Dr. Dubrow, his brother is the lead singer of Quiet Riot. Who
Dee Snider?
Wait.
No, that's
Twisted Sister.
Oh, that's Twisted Sister.
His name is Kevin Dubrow.
He's sort of assonant illiterate.
I'm a little bit horrified that I knew that Dee Snider was the.
And you jumped on that too. That was quick.
I jumped. Yeah, it's like
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when people talk about the '80s, they act like it was all erasure and Pet Shop Boys. But if you lived through it, it was mostly like Rat and Twisted Sister. And
I knew Twisted Sister because Dee Snider had this movie called, I forgot the name of the movie. It's late '90s, and it was a horror movie of this guy on the internet stalking teenagers and cutting them apart. I think it was called Strangeland or something like. It is. It was a very late '90s chat room murder movie.
That's so nice. Those late '90s. AOL chat murders.
Oh, I would love to watch. A horror movie about the internet at the dawn of the internet. It's got to be highly watchable.
There's a couple. There's Fear.com. There's a couple of them. Pulse, which was a horrible adaptation from a Japanese film, which was much better. I forgot the name of it, but when I find the name, please watch that and watch Pulse. Sorry,
you put it in the chat.
No, I mean, Jada, do you want to go ahead and introduce Patrick?
Yeah, I will introduce this horrible segue. I will introduce. I'm so sorry, Patrick. Okay, here we go. Okay. Upon reading Patrick Donnelly's work to write this introduction, a series of thoughts arose to the surface. His poetry holds together a sense of sensitivity and intelligence, while the narrators are complicated. Some speak to the divine, some relate to visual art for meaning or memory. Patrick Donnelly's words place us directly in the middle of these moments. What makes his work effective is a combination of pain and shining courage that's instilled in the lines. It's engaging and encourages readers to process the tenderness on the page and within. Patrick Donnelly is the author of 4 books of poetry. He's the director of the poetry seminar at the Frost Place He has taught at Smith College, Colby College, and Lesley University's MFA program, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference. Patrick Donnelly's poems have appeared in American Poetry Review, Slate, Plowshares, the Yale Review, the Virginia Quarterly Review, Hayden's Ferry Review, the Massachusetts Review, and many others. Along with his spouse, Stephen D. Miller, they translate Japanese poetry and drama that has been included in many journals. He's the recipient of the U.S./Japan Creative Artist Program Award, an artist fellowship from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the Margaret Bridgman Fellowship in Poetry from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and a 2018 Amy Clampett Residency Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Donnelly.
Thank you so much, Jada, for reading my work and thinking about it. I really appreciate that. And can you all hear me okay? I am thrilled to read with KGB, which is such a historic series, and I wish we were all in the bar, but this is great too. Jason and John and Matthew, thank you so much for all that you do. And Charlie, I'm so happy to read with you. We're pressmates at Four Way Books, and I have your book right here because I'm on Four Way Books standing order plan, so I get everything twice a year. And I spent this afternoon with your book, and I absolutely love it. So congratulations. So I'm going to read from a document on my desktop. So I'm kind of going to be looking just past you as though I were guilty about something. But my choices are to look down or to look at the screen. So my last book, Little Known Operas, came out early in 2019 in a world far, far away. This book is built with two intertwining sequences of poems. One sequence is mostly in the voice of my own very strange version of Jesus. Writing through this persona seemed to free me up to say some things I didn't know I wanted to say. And according to me, Jesus is a gardener, a Sufi, an esoteric Buddhist, an atheist, a Japanophile, a sufferer of ocular migraines, and a fan of Federico Garcia Lorca. The other sequence is about the great opera singer Maria Callas, but for tonight, I'm just gonna stick with Jesus, and then I will read one new poem. So here we go. Jesus said to me, "Did you mean to draw some moral from your own life? How you found love so late? How though you weren't patient, weren't kind, in pursuit were ruthless, it was given to you anyway. Though that story's not done, not proven, you have some wisdom to share with the loveless now, do you? Something they should or shouldn't do? The gay boy, the raped girl, the libeled widow." Jesus now resting his abraded hand on the book. "Go ahead then, speak, promise them something." Jesus said, "There's a story that I cursed a fig tree, Ficus carica. I will say I understand people who hate how loosely rooted are the petals of the peony, Paeonia lactiflora, Paeonia suffructicosa in its brackets. One morning you cut the stem and carrying it wet from the garden, thinking the lightest possible pink, and also you being you, trying not to think flecks of red, menstrual, tubercular, Keats's handkerchief. Next afternoon, you notice the petals have gone slightly crepey, more than one brown or spotted. The third day, you'll be on your knees, sweeping up the shattered head. In the news report about opposition to a local hospice, the NIMBY lady asked, "How can I be happy while that's across the street?" An excellent question. Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, Homo curiosum. Another is on the cheek, on the chest, on her shoulder, or in his lymph. What role can a brown spot, a purple spot, play in delight? No, really, what? Answer me. Jesus said, a program remembers, doesn't it, where you stopped watching the movie, where you clicked off those books before shutting off the light. Other programs remember your searches, your queue, passwords, complaints, the wallpaper you chose, how loud, how bright you preferred things to be, your presence in the streaming firmament. What I want to know is, after you've climbed up the 7-story bardos, louder and brighter than you prefer, I've heard, how long do you think they'll remember your place, hold it open for you, keep it warm? Written on the mirror in steam, Jesus's note read, "Try to remember who I was before you heard my name." Jesus asked, when one looks at Japanese scroll paintings of waterfalls, taki, black ink on white silk, those unfurlings of negative space suggesting mist and falling water, supposedly so cooling in summer, how conceivably to avoid thinking the word pubic? Those jutting rocks, those overhanging tufts of grasses, humid and peaty. A poet wrote, "Pictures are hard to see and people are hard to love. But it's harder still to unsee how sex is every solitary thing's verge, cresting sweet mess of wet before falling." Jesus said, "You will not be able to catch the swan boat of your youth by running after it like that. I know it was pretty. I know it didn't linger. I know the pier caught fire and sank. Wait," he said, "tarry a while alongside the wreck. I don't say this to everyone, but there will come another swan." Jesus said, "Buddhas of limitless light," a phrase encountered by accident, let's say, on an old scroll or overheard. Afterward, will it be impossible to feel so doubting and blue about people? Never again so stagey, so show me, so heart hurt, even if there are no Buddhas of limitless light? Jesus said, "God without concepts." I said, "But what about metaphor, simile, analogy, coyotes yipping at the moon in the water?" Jesus said, "God without concepts." I said, "Doctors without borders, dismissal without prejudice, bath time without tears." Jesus said, "The Rothko Chapel said, song without words." I said, "Oh, please, you just broke your own rule." And I said, instead of Rothko's empty black and purple voids, how about Vierzehnheiligen in Bavaria? Those creamy ovals, S-curves, rococo, stucco, volutes, shells, floating bows, witty, teasing, elusive architecture. Even Robert Venturi liked, look it up. Jesus said, God without, but it was late and I had already hung anyway up on him. I dreamed that Jesus bid me go and rake the ashes on Mount Golgotha, looking for the poems he lost there. My dear, don't weep, he said. One of them began, a bead like amber hung from pine. So you may, he said, find my virtue glinting in the dust. The rosin of my heart, he said. My dear, he said, my litter of lost rosin. You won't be surprised to learn that Jesus is a fan of Maria Callas, the great opera singer. He keeps up with everything important. Jesus said, just when I think I've heard everything Callas recorded, I stumble on something new. This Saint-Saëns thing I almost didn't click on because it was, Saint-Saëns, who stormed out of the Rite of Spring 29 May 1913, infuriated over the misuse of the bassoon. Anyhow, 61, Paris, Callas with her musical friend Georges Pret. Too bad they couldn't have married as well. They were good together. It was 3 years after her voice was supposedly gone, she gave to one listener an experience he described on YouTube. Working with my dad in the chip shop, radio on in the background, this was played. I couldn't recognize the singer, but remember saying, Dad, she has to be one of the greatest in the world. Her voice confused me. But how often do we get a chance to listen as if for the first time? His first time, so close to her last time. You, writing this, Jesus said, tried to be a singer when you were young. You weren't good enough. But Callas opened a neural pathway through which the representations run, masks of light and shade. Maybe her voice had almost to be gone before it could prove, with inevitable little slidings from one note to its neighbor or wider, Delilah to Samson, that her confidence was shot, but not her throat, still changing every note's color, all that has dark sounds, roots thrusting into the fertile loam known to all of us, ignored by all of us, a power and not a behavior, a struggle and not a concept, not even in the throat, but surging up from the soles of the feet, her feet before which lay paradise. I told Jesus, when I was afraid as a child, I looked for pictures of you in the encyclopedia and circled them around my bed. Jesus said, I remember Giotto, Cimabue, Fra Angelico. I remember the bells as Duccio's Maestà was carried into the cathedral. I told Jesus, I asked you to lift my gayness from me, lay down on my face in front of the altar at All Saints Church on West 4th Street in Detroit. I was 19, it was 1975, midnight, and the tiles were cold. Jesus said, I remember asking you, hath the rain a father, or who hath begotten the drops of dew? I told Jesus, for 30 years I asked you to send me someone to love, And then Stephen came and we married, but we were old. So I begged you, keep us alive. Let us live a little longer. Jesus said, I remember the poem of you that I sent to the Empress with a branch of flowering. So that's the end of the Jesus poems. And I'm going to finish with one new poem. Finally writing a lot right now after a dry period, and it's too early to say what the next book will be about, but I'm starting to see some weird numerical patterns. The number 13 is recurring. And the only thing I can guess about that is the emotional age I feel most of the time. I've also been writing about things in groups of 4, for instance, 4 teachers, 4 bad smells, and the poem I'm going to read, 4 waters. The number 13 appears in each of the 4 sections. 4 waters. 1. In winter, water comes cold from the hot tap until I count 13. 2. The cows at Sconset had a pox, and bearded Ben had to rub their teats with paste. 13. I drank spring water from a grassy pool the pilgrims knew, and the woods were full of ferns and fog. Dorothy and Tom, divorcing in the dry west, sent me to the wet east, the mist, the island, to live with actors, summer stock, a mercy. Ben played Henry in The Lion in Winter, told me my dad remarried fast because he was not the kind to whore around, showed me how to cook a meal without a recipe, some tomatoes, some fennel, improvising like Coltrane. Barbara, with the long red braid, picked berries on the moor, made me a most tender cake. I stole somebody's skiff, pyewacket or some such, abandoned it to the reeds when I couldn't row it back. Loved Birdie, a golden retriever. Loved my role, Robert, speaking Welsh in The Corn is Green. Loved a younger boy in the barn who wasn't that into it. The summer gone, freak snow over the ocean. A little plane carried me away. 3. A muscly guy I met on the Super Chief, Chicago to Albuquerque, asked if he could sail his boat up the Santa Fe River to visit me, and did I want to count his tattoos. My answers were no, because in autumn the river runs dry, water drawn off into the acequias for the corn, and yes, turned out there were 13, all homemade. It may have been a dry bed then, but now in my memories the water's fat and noisy. The foam has a cold tang and overshoots the grassy banks. 4. Young players and singers, not even graduated from Oberlin, Juilliard, Curtis, Peabody. We were hired to wait tables and play Mozart. After the guests went to bed, we swam in the lake. But was it 13 fathoms, the summer water, or 30 or 300 when a line of storms came across? That summer, a woman I knew wanted to visit and talked with me about God. Guests were forbidden, but I said, come anyway. We hid her in the staff cabin, fed her cold lobster stolen from the walk-in. Somehow every afternoon she strolled down to the beach and spread her blanket. One night the soprano who played Fiordiligi, talking to somebody else, poured boiling water onto my hand at the sink. 3 of us piled into a station wagon to take me to the rural ER an hour away. It was August 6, 1978, which I know because Pope Paul VI died that day. We drove through the closed up woods in and out of the fog until suddenly a sheet of flame fell onto the road in front of the car. The driver, a guy I loved on the maintenance crew, jammed the brakes, and we looked at the road and at each other. The flame was gone, but we all agreed we saw it. Probably only I thought of the Pope. We drove on until we arrived at the 2-room clinic, where a handsome doctor began to work on my hand, until an alarm rang. A woman in an ambulance, pills, overdose, suicide, etc. They put me in the hall with my hand in a bucket of ice, and Ruth, the French horn player, held my other hand. After a while, I heard the woman ask for a cigarette. They bandaged my fist like a football, sent me back with a week of Demerol. The next night, we sang Soave sia il vento in a glass pavilion on the lake, my burn aching. We never learned anything more about where the fire fell from, or how deep it had hidden, or when it might rise to the surface again. Thank you so much for listening.
That was really great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Charlie. That was wonderful.
Both of you guys were amazing.
Charlie, you and I share an interest in ruin, maybe an affection for ruin even. My second book was called Nocturnes of the Brothel of Ruin, of all things. So,
places where ruin is housed. Brothels of
yes.
Museums of ruin. Yeah.
I mean, I think ruin is important, and you know, that people should be ruined as quickly as possible, you know, just to get it over with. Yeah.
I think when it comes to that sort of thing, I often think about a place like Rome or something, and a lot of other places where like most of the beauty of the city is the ruins. You know what I mean? I think some of us are like that.
Yeah.
You know? It's interesting.
There's that Thomas Hardy poem, The Ruined Maid. Do y'all know that?
It's familiar, but it's been a long time.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've read it.
It's a
Refresh our-
dialogue.
yeah.
It's a dialogue between two women, one of whom has been ruined and is quite happy about it because she now lives in London and you know, doesn't have to dig raw potatoes out of the earth with her bare hands. So
Ruin has its upsides, apparently.
Yeah. I think it's mostly upside, depending on the.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah. I don't trust innocence at all.
Does anyone ever else have thoughts or questions for our poets? I realize we have a sort of an intimate group here, but I sort of love when that happens. We have a nice comment here from Nathan. Says, "Gorgeous, gorgeous new poem, Patrick. Can't wait to read more."
Thank you, Nathan.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I have a question for either of you. But I was just wondering, like, at what point do you guys, or did you decide within your time writing poetry, like, at what point do you learn to trust what you are creating and, like, trust in the way that it comes across and whatnot?
Charlie, do you want to?
Sure. I mean, I think that I mean, there's not like a, for me at least, there's not like a simple, clear answer or point, but I think that, you know, I just had to kind of keep writing and keep writing and keep writing and write a lot of poems that I believed in that I would later go back to and be horror stricken by. to get to a place where I suppose I got to a point where I'd been writing enough and I realized I just wanted to write things that gave me pleasure, I think, and that became an important criterion for me. And, you know, like there's not like a single specific moment necessarily, but writing something that I could come back to and be pleased by and like enjoy in some way, rather than think that, you know, what I'm writing is important or even necessary. But I think letting the idea of it being a pleasing experience for me to read it or amusing in some way, was sort of freeing, as opposed to you know, trying to grapple with putting meaning or something important in you know, foregrounded in a poem. I think that, you know, like those things are there. Like there's no way to avoid your own anxieties or obsessions or whatever they are. So yeah, I think getting to a point where I could trust myself, that could trust that like I was writing things that would please me, you know, 6 months, 6 years later, was valuable. I don't know if that totally answers the question.
No, yeah, you answered my question. Thank you.
You know, publishing in journals that you respect and publishing books, you know, that makes you feel something like that people you respect like the work, but I have never really gotten over my doubt about whether the new stuff is any good. I always am not sure of that. So yeah, I turn to my poetry people, my peers in you know, peer workshops to tell me what they think. And I think, you know, because the doubt never really goes away, you just really have to enjoy working on poems. I mean, that is the constant. That's the thing that never is going to leave. So you have to enjoy working on the poems. It's like, and sometimes I don't even like that. You know, it's like, sometimes I don't want to work, but I am actually happiest when I am working. In retrospect, always, when I realize that I'm happy, I think, oh, I've been working, you know, on my own writing for a while. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I want the doubt ever to go away. On some level, I don't want to feel like, oh, I got this, and then, you know, not not have it. So I think it's important to worry on a certain level, but not so much that you can't work. I mean, that defeats the whole purpose. So
as you're talking, Patrick, I'm thinking of the Merwin poem "Berryman" and how it ends. You know, a student is asking Berryman, you know, how do you know when you're good? How do you know if what you've written is any good? And he says, you'll never know. You'll never know. You'll die not knowing. If you have to know, don't write. And that's a broadside we have on the wall in our house. It's just a wonderful reminder.
Yeah, that's great.
It's brutal, but it's really true. You don't know. You just have to enjoy working and then let it go. But one thing I do love that is sort of comes from the writing, but not totally, is just being part of the community of writers. You know, feeling that fellowship. Like we're all struggling with our doubts and whatever our life circumstances are, you know, to make something good. It's not easy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Yeah, thank you guys. I think that's probably something that everybody gives a little bit of thought to from time to time. There's always that moment. You know what I mean?
When you're not sure of your work or what?
Yeah, I think that's sort of what I mean. I mean, do you get to a point at some point? Is it ever? You mentioned earlier, like it's at some point there might be some sense that you need validation, but you like to only necessarily require that from people that you've selected. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I choose people who I feel are a little bit better than me at at something, that I want to learn to do. Because the last thing you want in a peer workshop is for people to consolidate you in your bullshit, You want people who will call you out on it, kindly, but
I know that is sort of true, that there's nothing sort of more empty and forgettable than a workshop where everybody kind of loved everybody. And it was just sort of, I mean, not to say they didn't love each other as sort of people, but who were not willing to sort of be critical of each other, so, because who the hell learns anything that way?
There's a workshop model here in Western Massachusetts, and I had not heard of it. I think it's actually spread far and wide, but until I came here, I had not heard of it. And as I understand it, it's that you only say positive things about the poem up for discussion. And I guess I caused some upset when, people came into my own private workshop, and that wasn't the way it was. So
hearing that, I think I feel like anybody can sort of find a way in a group to make it be meaningful and find a way to get value or use out of different strategies in the workshop. Hearing that, I'm reminded of the very first graduate workshop that I took with dear departed Stanley Plumley, and my poem was the first poem in the packet on the first day of workshop, and I read the poem, and Stan picked up the packet and sort of held it like a sock that he had pulled from under a couch or something, and looked at it and read the first line and sort of looked around and said, "Well, this is fucking terrible." And that was the first line of criticism, of critique in my first graduate workshop. So there are definitely different ways to get there.
There's a range. I had Charles Simic as a professor at the University of New Hampshire, and he once told a student, "This is why Nazis shot poets in the back of the head." It's like, oh, okay, so that's the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
You don't want to hurt the person necessarily.
I have no patience with that.
Yeah.
Paisley Rekdal has been having a really interesting thread on her Facebook page. She asked about criticisms that people had found harsh, from workshop leaders. And the thread has just gone on for like
really
300 posts, because everybody has some terrible story to tell. But I mean, why would you want to do that to anybody? It's like there is always a way to explain the problem in a kind, or at least a neutral way. It's like, why would you want to send somebody away humiliated, or how are they going to work after that? It's just.
So you're not a Simon Cowell fan, I don't think.
No, and I've heard terrible stories about male teachers especially berating women in workshop, and then some of those people just withdrew from their programs and stopped writing. I mean, that is criminal. It's like not funny at all.
We have a comment from Melinda here too. That says it should never be easy or automatic, and I think doubt can be useful in the editing process. It's true. I've sort of wondered to what extent, if anybody's engaging in an art form in order to just kind of reaffirm for themselves their own greatness, and they completely are allergic to any kind of criticism, you know, that being a different kind of extreme.
They're living in the wrong decade.
But this idea that, what's that?
In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they're living in the right decade. Now they're living in the wrong decade.
This is true. But anyway, thank you guys so much. This was fantastic. And I love hearing your thoughts on craft, of course, as well. This is great.
All right, so we'll be back next week with the Slappering Hall press reading. And so we'll have Amy Lemon, Lynn McGee, Susanna Case, and Margot Stever. And the link, we've been saying every week that the link that got you in today will work next Monday, but apparently we're having some link crisis.
I know. I'm starting to feel like, you know, that place in East Village, Criff Dogs, where like if you went into the telephone booth and like you would have to like call it up and then a door would open and you go into the little speakeasy. Now all of a sudden we're going to become exclusive by no means of our own, by no intention. So what do we do?
And hopefully
this is our problem, not yours.
We'll figure it out, and then hopefully we'll meet you back next Monday in a more hopeful country.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah.
And this reading will become available next Tuesday at 7 p.m. And tomorrow at 7 p.m. you can see Sarah Kane Gutowski and Matthew Thorburn's reading from last week, which was wonderful. Go live. All right, I'm going to stop recording.